Let's learn together a Rashi. A Rashi in this week's Parsha, Parshas Toldot. The Pasuk says, the first source in your source sheets. This is Toldot, our weekly Parsha, Vayigdalu Hana'arim. The children grew up. Rivka and Yitzchak have twins. Eisav and Yaakov. Eisav is the oldest, Yaakov is the youngest. They grow up. Vayhi Eisav ish yodei tzayid ish sada, v'Yaakov ish tom Yosef v'Hovel. This is a brief and concise description of the two boys. Eisav is a man who knows how to hunt, he knows how to trap, he's a man of the field. Yaakov is a wholesome person, a dweller of the tents. Says Rashi, Yodei tzayid, he knows how to hunt, he knows how to trap. You might think it means literally, he was a great hunter, a man of the field. Says Rashi, Yodei tzayid actually is a hint to something, it's a parable. Lotzu d'l'ramas es aviv b'fiv. He knows how to hunt, how to trap, how to deceive, how to slyly deceive his father through his mouth. Later, the pasuk would of course say that Yitzchak loves Yaakov kitzayid b'fiv, because he brings him the hunt into his mouth. So either it means literally he would hunt and feed him, or b'fiv, as Rashi says here, he knows how to trap him with his mouth. How does he deceive his father with his mouth? V'shoyalo, he asks him, Abba, Tate, father, he'eich ma'asrin es hamelech v'es Tevin. How does one give meiser? How does one tithe salt and straw? Kisavur aviv, his father thinks, shu medaktik b'mitzvahs. He's extremely meticulous in mitzvahs. What is the meaning of this Rashi, which has its source in Medrash? So everybody knows there's a Mishnah, the next source, Masechta Maisros, the first Mishnah of Maseches Maisros. Klal Amru b'Maisros. The rabbis established a halachic principle when it comes to Maiser. What is Maiser, of course? There's a Torah obligation in Eretz Yisrael that the produce, the grain, the fruits that grow in a Jewish field or a Jewish farm, a certain percentage of it must be contributed for tzedakah, must be given for charity. So there is around 2% that goes to the Kohen, who worked in the Beis HaMikdash and therefore didn't make his own income, which is called Truma. There is 10% after that which goes to the Levi, who also worked in the Beis HaMikdash, which is called Meiser Rishon. There's another 10% which goes to the poor man, poor people around the land, which is called Meiser Ani. That latter Meiser is interchangeable some years with another Meiser called Meiser Sheni, which was the percent that you brought to Yerushalayim, you ate it there, or you exchanged it on money and you brought the money to Yerushalayim and you bought food there. And that's how every Jew had a chance to visit Yerushalayim, to build the economy of Yerushalayim, to be inspired and become part of the life of Yerushalayim, even if you lived in a farm far away in the north or in the south or wherever it was. That's Meiser. What's the klal by Meiser? What do I give Meiser from? Do I give Meiser from cheese? Do I give Meiser from meat? Do I give Meiser from chicken? Do I give Meiser from eggs? Klal amru b'meisros. Kol sho oichel. Number one, it has to be human food. Number two, v'gidulav min haaretz. It must grow from the ground. Chayev b'meisros, it's chayev b'meisros. The Mishnah accounts another few details, but this is what we want to discuss. So number one, human food. Human, it's what a human can consume. Eggs is human food. Meat is human food, but doesn't grow from the ground. It comes from an animal. Straw comes from the ground, but it's not human food, it's animal fodder. So you have to have oichel and gidulav min haaretz. Salt doesn't grow from the ground. Tevin, straw grows, but it's not human food. So Eisav comes and he's trying. Mazel tov. Whoa. Was it something I said? I thought we were just learning a Mishnah. The poor chevra were trying to have breakfast peacefully. Okay. Now I see everybody who doesn't come to my shir. Mamish b'mezid. Okay, so Nachzil, let's go back. Lushin, Lushin, it's fine. So comes Rashi and says, Eisav is trying to trap his father. He wants to appear to his father as a super religious, a super frum, a super holy child. So he comes to his father and he said, I have a Akash. Keitzad Masrin, how do you give Meiser from salt? How do you give Meiser from straw? I want to also give this to charity. I also want to give this to the Koyanim, to spiritual people who serve God, to poor people. How do I do it? This is how he's deceiving his father. This is the Rashi. Seems like an innocent Rashi. Every Jew learning Chumash and Rashi, every child knows this Rashi. Come many of the commentators of Rashi and raise a few major questions in Rashi. Number one, if Eisav would actually be the type of child who took salt and took straw and gave meiser from it, so you could say, Yitzchak looks at his son and says, wow, he goes the extra mile. He's a machmir, he's a mahadr. Mahadr mina mahadr. And he doesn't do what you have to, he goes beyond the letter of the law. Granted. But Eisav, it doesn't say Eisav did that. Eisav is asking him a question. Keitzat, he'eich ma'asrunas hamelech v'atevin. How do you give ma'aser for melech and tevin? How exactly do you do it? This demonstrates, what does it demonstrate? In your opinion, it demonstrates extra religiosity. It demonstrates that he's more frum, that he's more holy. It demonstrates first and foremost amiratzis, vista amiratzis, ignorance. Imagine he would come to Yitzchak and say, I have a question. How do you put tzitzis, how do you place tzitzis on the four corners of the tablecloth that we use for Shabbos? Or he would say, how do you put tefillin on your leg? I want to know, how do you put tefillin on the leg? Or another question, what do you do exactly in order to observe Shabbos on Tuesday? Or to observe Yom Kippur on Chanukah? There's no such a thing. This is amiratzis, it's ignorance. There's no meiser for melech, there's no meiser for tevin. It's not an impressive question. It demonstrates ignorance. What is more? Eisav is growing up in Yitzchak Avinu's house. If he's growing up in his house, so he apparently he's watching what he's doing. All his years, Yitzchak is not mafresh meiser for melech and tevin because there's no meiser for melech and tevin. So how is it that Eisav is trying to impress his father? By demonstrating absolute ignorance and absolute apathy, not looking at what his father was doing all of these years, and not giving meiser for melech and tevin. Then there's a third question the Mefarshim raise. What type of question is it? Te'eich ma'asrin es hamelech v'esatevin. What does the word ma'asrin mean? Anybody? What does the word ma'asrin mean? Meiser. What does meiser come? Me'eser, 10%. So he asks, how do you give 10% from salt and straw? Just like you give 10% from anything else. You take the salt, you take the straw, you divide it into 10 parts, and you give 10%. If you don't want to give from the actual, you take the value of it, whatever the value is, and you give 10% of it. If it costs $100, you give $10. If it costs $10, you give $1. What question? It's not so complicated. Either in the volume or in the value. B'middah, there's ways of giving ma'aser, what's called b'middah, b'mishkel, b'minyan. The volume, the weight, the value, the price, whatever it is. You take 10%, you give it. What's fascinating is that Rashi changes the source. Rashi didn't invent this idea. The Chazal articulate this story in the Medrash. That's where Rashi took it from. When you look in the source, it says something different. Take a look, Medrash Tanchuma. Medrash Tanchuma, which is the source of Rashi, says that Eisav came to Yitzchak and he said, Melech and Tevin, salt and straw, ma'u shetehei chayeves b'maiser. What's the halacha? Is it obligated in maiser? Oh, now I hear a psakasha. Eisav Mamish, I see that Yitzchak has not been giving Meiser for Melech and Tevin, and I would like to know if there's a gather of Meiser in salt and in Tevin. And you may even want to become lumdish a little bit and say that the Chazal say that if somebody, if there's like, what are these called? Those mountains of salt, and you choitzev melech min hamachzev, you, what's the word? You mine salt from its source on Shabbos. Chayiv mishum koitzer. It can be a form of harvesting. So Eisav is asking his father, is there a gather of Meiser? It's not ignorance, he's asking a question, and it's obviously he knows that there's a difference between Tevin. Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says, how do you give Meiser for Melech and Tevin? Eisav, you don't give Meiser for Melech and Tevin, just like you don't put on tefillin on your leg, and you don't celebrate Shabbos on Tuesday, you don't put tzitzis on a tablecloth. You put tzitzis on a beged, on a garment. Medrash Rabbah also says the story, but again different. Medrash Rabbah says, Eisav came to Yitzchak, ha'eich mesaknin milcha, ha'eich mesaknin tivna. How are you mesakin? How do you fix salt? How do you fix straw? Rashi changes it from mesaknin to ma'asrin. Now often in the literature of Shas, mesaknin, to be mesakin, produce, means to give meiser. That's how you mesakin it. That's how you make a tikkun. That's how you fix it up and you can eat it. Because before that it's tevel, which means tavloi, it's not good. But it's interesting. In the Medrash, if you wish, you can impose an interpretation that's actually very impressive. What Eisav is telling Yitzchak is, I have a problem. The reason we're obligated to give meiser from our produce, from our grain, from our fruits, etc., is in order to demonstrate Lashem ha'aretzim loya, that the world, our resources, our wealth, our affluence belongs to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and therefore we share a certain percentage with the community, with the poor, with the destitute, with the Kohen, and with the Levi. That's the imposed taxation that represents that you're not just an absolute extreme capitalist and everything is me. Frekt Eisav Ashayla, Eich mesaknen milcha, Eich mesaknen tivna. How do you create the tikkun in salt? How do you create the tikkun in straw? How do you demonstrate in these foods that Lashem ha'aretzim loya, because there's no obligation of meiser? That would be an impressive question. But Rashi changes the words from Medrash Tanchum and from Medrash Rabbah. What Rashi says is, He'eich ma'asrin es hamelech v'esat Tevin. How do you give meiser from straw and salt? Where were you all these years? Why weren't you watching your father? And why are you thinking that this is going to impress him when really it's going to demonstrate absolute amiratzis ignorance? The Mefarshim struggle with this Rashi. Different Mefarshim, different commentators give different perspectives. You have the Gurari, you have the Maharal, you have Rebbe Eliyahu Mizrahi, you have the Maskil of David, you have the Divrei David of the Taz. Rashi has many commentators, and different ones give different perspectives. Some are difficult. But today I want to focus on one hashkafa, one perspective given on this Rashi. It was shared by the Lubavitcher Rebbe at a Fabrengen Shabbos Parshas Toldot Tovshin Lamed Dalet. Shabbos Toldot 1973, published in his volumes of Likutei Sichos on Parshas Toldot. I think volume 25. And he said that this Rashi truly, if you go into it literally word for word, you will see that every single word is consistent with Rashi's view and Rashi's perspective according to Pshutei Shel Mikra, the literal interpretation of the Psukim, and I want to share with you his perspective here. We ask a question. How can Eisav ask such a foolish question? Anybody who knows the basics of meiser knows you don't give meiser of straw, you don't give meiser of salt. But one second. Let's remember a Rashi earlier in Parshas Lech Lecha. Take a look at the next source. Avraham Avinu went to war against the 4 kings that defeated Sdoim and took all of its members, including his nephew Lot and his family, into captivity. And Avraham Avinu was successful. He defeated them. He liberated all those who were abducted, who were kidnapped. And Melech Sdoim tells him, he says, Ten li hanefesh v'rechush ka'achloch, all the spoil of the war you can take for yourself, just give me back the captives. Avraham Avinu says, I will take nothing. I will not take a thread, I will not take a shoelace from you. I will take nothing. Then the Torah says Avram meets a very interesting man, his name is Malki Tzedek. He's a king of a place called Sholem. The rabbis and Rashi associate him with Shem, the son of Noach, who was the king of Yerushalayim at the time. And they have a meal together, they eat bread, they feast with wine. And then the pasuk says, Lech lecha perik Yudalet, pasuk Yudches, and then Chav. Umalki tzedek melech shalom hoitzi lechem v'yayin v'hu chayin l'keil elyon. Malki tzedek, the king of Shalom, took out bread and wine to celebrate the victory of Avraham Avinu, and he's a kohen to the God on high. And Malki tzedek tells Avram, Baruch keil elyon asher migein tzarecha b'yadecha. Blessed is the God of above, who has protected you and delivered your oppressors in your hands. Vayiten loy meiser mikoil. And he gave him meiser from everything. Who is he gave he? Of course, the Mefarshim argue about that. There's nothing we don't argue about, even when it's not ambiguous, certainly when it's ambiguous. But let's see what Rashi says. Says Rashi, Vayiten loy Avram. Vayiten refers on Avram. Avram gave Malki Tzedek meiser mikoil asher loy. He gave him meiser from everything that he owned. Why? Lefisha Kohen. Of course, when Rashi says he was a kohen, he doesn't mean literally a kohen. Aaron HaKohen wasn't born. There were no kohenim yet at the time. He means he represented the idea, the notion, the status of a kohen. Somebody who's dedicated his life to spiritual service, dedicated his life to teaching, dedicated his life to the service of God, and therefore he represented the idea of a kohen the way it was in a pre-Matan Torah days in the world of Avraham Avinu, the world of monotheism of Amunah. So Avraham Avinu gives a meiser from everything. What's this everything, Mikoil? This is not from his produce. Avraham Avinu certainly had produce, but as the pasuk says in Lech Lecha, Avraham was a wealthy man. He had soinu, bakar, kesev, izav, avodim, shvachas, gmalim. He had all types of things, including gold and silver, things that are not karka, they're not produce, they're completely mobile, they're not animal, they're not human food. He gives him ma'isa from everything. Gives him ma'isa from everything. So we see that Avraham Avinu, the father of the Jewish people, felt the importance and the obligation on himself to give to the kohen meiser, the kohen, the poor person, the kohen who may have also been a poor person, meiser from everything. In fact, the pasuk says in Vayera, Hashem says, Ki yedaitiv, I love Avraham Avinu, why? L'man asher yitzaveh, as banav, as beisay acharav, v'shamru derech Hashem, lasois, tzedakah mishpat. I cherish Avraham because he educates his children to follow his way, to do tzedakah and justice, charity and justice. So if Avraham Avinu did this, the uniqueness of Avraham Avinu is he shares it with his children. In fact, take a look at his grandchild, Yaakov Avinu. There's a pasuk in Vayetze. Yaakov is traveling, next week's parsha, and what does he say? He promises Hashem, if you're with me, Perik Chavches Pasuk Chav Beis, Va'even Azois Asher Samti Matzei V'yiyeh Beis Elohim, V'choil Asher Titein Li, Aser Asrenu Lach. Everything that you give me, whatever you give me, I will give part of it. Aser Asrenu, from the word meiser, like the word meiser, a part of it, a 10% of it, I will give away to you. And in fact, I believe it says Askedim and Bali Atoisvizdim, Mefarshim say there that this is meiser, not from produce. V'choil asher titen li is everything. It's meiser min amamin, from anything he has, anything that's worth money, including produce, of course, but anything else. In fact, even without this clear Rashi about Avraham Avinu, and others have different interpretations what Vayiten loy meiser mikoil means, if it means from the spoil of war. That's apparently what the Rambam believes, according to many Mefarshim and Hilchas Malach and Perik Tes. But we're going now the view of Rashi. We're learning a Rashi today. Really, we all understand another basic notion. The Gemara says it, it's a Yisoid among Chazal. The Gemara says it at the end of Masechta Kedushin, the last Mishnah, in Masechta Yuma Daf Chavches, Kedushin Daf Pei Beis, Ki'em Avraham Avinu Kol HaTorah Kula Ad Shaloi Nitna. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov observed the whole Torah before it was given. It says in Parshas Toldot, Eikev asher shama Avraham b'koile vayishmar mishmarti mitzvoisei chukoisei v'soiroisei, in the plural, he observed my Torahs, and Chazal say even Torah shebal peh, and even mitzvahs derabanan. The Gemara says even Eruv Tafshilin Avraham Avinu observed. Now everybody understands there's a mitzvah known as Meiser Ksofim. There's Meiser we give from produce in Eretz Yisrael. But there's meiser that we give from money. Money means all revenue, all profits I make, whatever form of profits, whether it's karka, whether it's metaltalin, whether it's cash, whatever type of revenue I make, there's a mitzvah to give a portion of it to the poor person. And this is a halacha that is applicable today as it always was. Yeridei Siman Reish Mem Tes Hilchos Taka, a din in Shulchan Aruch you have to give in order to satisfy the needs of the poor people, or minimum 10%, and if you could, till a chaimish, which is 20%. What's the source of this mitzvah? Where do we know it from? So let's see. There's a Gemara in Tainis Daf Tesav and Aleph. Zog the Gemara, famous Gemara, quoting a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh, Aser, which we read on Yom Tif, Aser ta'aser es kol tvu azarecha. Twice. Meiser, you should give Meiser from all the grain of your seed. Zog the Gemara, why? Aser ta'aser, Aser shvil shetis asher. Give Meiser, give tzedakah in order to gain wealth. And as the Gemara continues, this is the one mitzvah you're allowed to test the Rebbeinu Shalom. B'chanuni na bezois v'arikaisi lachem bracha ad b'lidai at sheyivlu sifsei seichem elamadai. God says, test me. Test me. Aser b'shvil shetesash. Zok toisvus. Aser teyaser hachi isa b'sifri. This is what the Sifri says. The Sifri is the commentary to Sefer Dvarim from the Tanoim and early Amirayim, Sifri de Beirav. Rav Tano Polig, Hachi Yisab Sifri. Actually, the text of Sifri that we have, I don't think it's here, but Tosfos obviously had an older version of Sifri that disappeared over the ages. This happens often, that the Rishonim quote Medrashim that they had that we don't have, because unfortunately, with all of the Xeris and expulsions, although we have so much, we also have a tremendous amount that has been lost. Of course, the biggest loss is complete volumes of Shas, of Talmud Yerushalmi, that are completely gone. Says Tosfos, Hachi Yisa b'Sifri, Aser ta'aser es kol tvu azarecha, yoytzi asadar shana shana. Ein li el tvu azarecha shechayev b'maiser. I only know that you're chayev to give maiser from your produce, from your grain. That's what the Mishnah says in Maiseris. It has to be gidul of min haaretz. Ribis. What about revenue that you make from ribis, from interest? Not to a Jew. Ribis, revenue you make from ribis, from interest. Uprakmatya, business. V'chol shar revachim, and any other profit you make. So you made this year, Be'ezer Hashem, $300,000 profit. Okay, $3 million, I'm sorry. Prakmatya, v'chol shar revachim, and all other profits, minayin, how do you know? Talmud loymar eskoil. Da have a Metzia lemeimer es tvuascha. Aser ta aser es tvuascha. Es tvuasarech. My koil. Whenever the Torah uses an extra word, superfluous, it always wants to add something. All the grain. If it would have said from the grain, we wouldn't know it should be from all the grain. What's some of the grain? Not. Le rabbis ribis prakmatya v'chol davar shemarviach by. This includes any revenue, any profit you make, you have to give meiser. This is known as meiser ksafah. Many Rishonim, as it sounds like from here from Tosfos and more from Mordechai and others, believe it's min ha-Torah. It's an obligation min ha-Torah, aser to aser is kol, that I have to give for all my profits. Others argue, the Taz holds in Yeridei Siman Shin Lamed Aleph and Hilchos Trumas HaMaestros, that the view of the Beis Yosef is, and others, that it's not a chiyuv min ha-Torah, it's a chiyuv midirabanan. This pasuk is what's called an asmachta, meaning we use this pasuk as a source, but it's not mamash a biblical commandment. The Bach is unique. He says in Yeridei Siman Shin Lamed Aleph, it's not a mitzvah min ha-Torah, and it's not even a mitzvah midirabanan. It's a minig, it's a Jewish custom. The Chavos Yair, parenthetically, in his Shalos Tshuvos, I think Siman Reish Chav Daled writes on this Bach, he says, I don't know how we can say this, when there's a pasuk, Aser to Aser es kol, and the Sifri says that this is a clear limud, that you have to give meiser from everything. So he says, even if it's not min ha-Torah, it's certainly a chiyuv midirabanan, and he finishes the Tshuvah, he says, Ha-bach nishbar v'anachnu nimlotnu, which is a paraphrase of the pasuk in Tehillim, Ha-pach nishbar v'anachnu nimlotnu, the barrel, the pach, the jug broke and we escaped. So he says he has no way of legitimizing this view of the Bach, but this is a big discussion if it's a min ha-Torah or midirabanan or even less than midirabanan. Regarding our conversation, however, it's very clear. Avram Avinu observed the whole Torah before it was given, even a derabanan, certainly a deraisa, even Erev Tavshilim, which is not a deraisa. So Avram Avinu gave meiser from all revenue, all profits, anything he had. whatever he owned, ribis, pragmatir, revachim, produce, not produce, human food, not food at all. We have a pasuk vayitin lo ma'aser mekayel, and we have a mitzvah that a Jew gives ma'aser from everything, and Avram educates his children with these principles, with these precepts as well. If that's the case, our initial premise that Eisav is a vister ama'aret, he's displaying absolute mockery of his knowledge, he's displaying absolute ignorance by saying, how do you give ma'aser from salt and straw? Maybe erroneous. True, if we put it into the specific genre of ma'aser, which we usually call ma'aser karkoyes, ma'aser that you give from produce of the earth, what grows from the earth, you're right, doesn't fit into the category of Masechta Maasros, not salt and not straw. But if we look at Meiser in the more general idea of Meiser, as we use it even today in Jewish slang, did you give Meiser yet? As we see the Sifri Aseh to Aseh, and we see by Avram Avinu, Vayitin Loi, Meiser, which is not referring to produce, and we see by Yaakov Avinu, Aseh Asrenu, which is not referring only to produce, Ma'asrin could include salt and straw. If so, let's now go to the next step. What's Eisav's question? What is Eisav's question? Here might be his question, according to the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This is what he says. All foods, all substances in the world have their unique purpose. And as a result of that, their unique value, basically based on supply, demand. Melach and Tevin are unique items. Salt and straw are very unique. Why? Salt on its own, independently, is quite insignificant. What are you going to do with salt? What are you going to do with an item as salt? However, we all know that what it contributes is very significant. You're making a bar mitzvah, you're making a sheva brachas, you make a huge cholent for all of your guests. One problem. Stuck in Salz. And the oilam starts eating the cholent, the oilam starts eating the yoich, the soup, the oilam starts eating the salad. And the plates come back to the kitchen full. Why? Eisav already lamented about this. Eisav, Job, and Perik Vav, Pasuk Vav. His friends come to explain to him why he suffered so much tragedy. They rationalize his pain, and Eisav responds in the famous words, Hayei ochel tafel mibli melach. You're going to eat bread without salt. Im yesh tam berir chalamos. Is there taste in the saliva of a healthy man? Somebody's going to eat saliva, and he's telling his friends, this is what your arguments taste like. Your arguments, taken, as they say in Yiddish, of kadoches, like tafel mibli melach, like tam berir chalamos. That's what they're like. That's what he says. In other words, the lack of salt can destroy the whole meichel. And then, when you ask, what's the value of salt? It depends. If you tell me, what do you want to eat for breakfast today for lunch? I'm not going to tell you, just give me a cup of salt. What am I going to pay you for salt? But on the other hand, if you're giving me a beautiful, wonderful salad or a wonderful soup, now the value of the salt, in terms of what it contributes to something else, it's very significant. Without it, you could throw it out into the garbage. Maybe a smell, but not a taste. They say a Maisa by Hasidim, they say a very interesting story. There were two students of the Mezritcha Magid. Reb Shlomo of Karlin, Schusa Yagan Aleinu, Reb Shlomo Karliner. He was a Talmud of Reb Aaron of Karlin, Reb Aaron HaGadol. And the Balatanya, Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi the Alter Rebbe. Reb Shlomo of Karlin once came to the city of Lyozhna, which is in Belarus, to visit the Balatanya. They knew about it before, so the Rebbetzin decided to arrange a Kabbalah Sponim, a beautiful feast to welcome this great tzaddik to her home. Of course, she had a meshareses, a maid who helped, a cook, like a chef in the house, who helped out with all the meals and all the feasts. So they got into an argument, who gets the schus to cook for this great meal. The regular chef, the woman who took care of the kitchen, said, it's not fair. I'm always the cook. Now you're going to do it. It's not fair. The Rebbetzin said, the Rebbetzin of the Balatanya, her name was Sterner, I want to do it. So they had an argument, so they went for a semi-din Torah to her husband, the Balatanya. So he said, let's make a pshara, split up the menu, and you'll do part of it, and you'll do part of it. V'kachav. So each one did another dish. One thing they didn't discuss is who's going to put in the salt. So at the end, they each decided, I want the schus of putting in the salt. So she put in the salt, and the other lady also put in the salt. So now the soup was Baruch Hashem very, very gesalzen. The meal began. Reb Shlomo Kaliner was a Kaddish Elyon, sits down, takes a spoon, and starts eating the soup. He takes one gulp of the soup in his mouth, and he tastes what it's like, and he moves it away. The Balatanya wasn't looking at him eat, but he finished his bowl, so he turns around and he sees it wasn't touched. So he says, Reb Shlomo, Favas estinish diyoich, why didn't you eat the soup? So he says, you can't eat it. It's a gesalzen. My question is, how did you eat it? So he told him that when I came to Mezrich, to my Rebbe, the Mezrich Magid, who was the successor and student of the Baal Shem Tov, the first Shabbos I was there, the Magid of Mezrich was eating kugel. When he finished eating his piece of kugel, he gave me the plate of the kugel, and he said, nah, ask the kugel. And he said, since I tasted that kugel, I lost my taste in any food in Olam Hazeh. So for me, there's absolutely no difference if it's salted or not salted. I didn't taste it. But we all understand that for the ordinary human being, salt is quite valuable. Now let's take straw. A very similar feature exists with straw. Independently, what is the value of straw? Okay, it's animal fodder, but there could be abundance of it. You can also use it for fuel in a fireplace. As the Mishnah says, Tevin lahasaka. You use straw as fuel for a fire. But there, the value is quite it's something, but it's insignificant. It's not worth a lot. However, there's another major use of straw, and those in the business of construction and bricks know very well this usage of straw, and you don't have to go back already to the beginning of time. The Doira Flug and Parshas Noach, or Golas Mitzrayim and Parshas Shmois, there was a whole drama around this in Parshas Shmois. Take a look in Shmois Perikei Vayitzaf Pari Vayom Hu as Anoxin Bombe Straight of Lamer. Lo Sifun Losses Tevin Lam Lilben Alavenim Kismel Shilshim. Heim Yolchu V'Kosh Shulaim Tevin. What used to be the system was the Egyptians used to give the Hebrew slaves straw, and they would form the bricks. How are bricks formed? You take mud. Anybody of you formed bricks ever? You never did this as leisure? Okay. You take mud, but that's not enough. Even if you bake the mud in the oven, it's not going to be a brick. You have to put in straw, a nice amount of straw. And then, of course, you put it in a mold, so it should be the form that you want to brick it. And then you put it either in the sun, depends where you live, or you bake it in an oven, a kivshon, and you have a wonderful brick with which you could build Pisim and Ramses, and hopefully more enduring edifices and buildings. That's bricks. So Para used to give the Jews the straw, so they had to make the bricks and build. He says, stop. Let them go search for their own straw. Tichba da avoide vayafetzam b'chalartz mitzrayim lekoshish kash letevin vayuku shoytri b'nei Yisrael vayitzakol paralemer lama tase kachal avadecha tevin einitin lavadecha leveinim moimrim lanu asu. Here you have a whole story in Parshas Shmois. So straw on its own, like salt, not very significant, almost valueless. But when you look at a brick, bricks are expensive. Construction material is expensive. Then an ada yom hazeh. Here, without the straw, it's like the yoich, it's like the soup without the salt. You can't make your brick. Here, the value of the straw is exaggerated dramatically. So these are two interesting items. On their own, a minuscule value. But when you look at what they contribute to something outside of themselves, whether it's food, whether it's bread, soup, salad, meat, cholent, whatever it is, or bricks, here the value is much more dramatic. I have a brick and I don't have straw. What am I ready to pay for the straw? I really need a straw, even if there's no shortage. But its value is far more dramatic. If this is the case, let's take a look now at Rashi. Eisav comes to Yitzchak and he asks a question. And his question is, Abba, Tata, I know you give meiser from everything, and it's clear. Everything you give 10%. Avram Avinu gave Meiser, Yaakov is going to give Meiser, Yitzchak gave Meiser. We know that Yitzchak gave Meiser from produce. We're going to learn in Parshas Toldot. Vayimtze bashana hi meir sharim zakrashi oimed zeh l'meiser saya. But you give Meiser from everything. How do you give? It's not a question. 10%. 10% of the volume, 10% of the value, 10% of the weight. I mentioned before, there's middah, mishkel, and minyan. It's a separate discussion, but one of those three ways. My question is, Eich ma'asrin es hamelach ves hatev. How do you give Meiser? Exactly those words. How do you give Meiser from salt and straw? 10%. Very well. But 10% of what? How do I look at the value of salt or straw? 10% of what? If I look at the salt independently, it may be 10% of 10 cents. So I give you 1 penny. But if I look at the value of salt in terms of how it enhances a dish so significantly and dramatically, the price of salt is far more significant. I give Meiser from that. Maybe then it's $1. Maybe it's $10. Maybe I give you 10 cents. Maybe I give you $1. The same as with straw. Other things that their chashivus, their significance exists in and of themselves, even if by their contribution to others, to other items, their value becomes more dramatic, but nonetheless, it's obvious that you give Meiser from the way they exist on their own. But here with Melech and Tevin that on their own, that's not really their chshivas. What are you going to do with salt? You're going to make it the centerpiece of your meal? Well, you're going to design it as a piece of art? What you're going to do with salt is put it into a dish. So maybe here the whole Meiser has to be measured, not based on what it is today, but what it might be next week, when it actually saved your cholent or saved your salad or made you a brick. That's the question. Now take a look in the words of Rashi. Kisavur aviv, the first words, the second source. Kisavur aviv sho medaktek b'mitzvahs. Rashi is a medaktek. Rashi is a medaktek. What would be the right word here? Eisav wants to give Meiser from salt and straw, even though you're potter, in the literal understanding of Rashi before our discussion. So Rashi should have said, Kisavur aviv sho mahader b'mitzvahs. Kisavur aviv shol machmer b'mitzvahs. Yeah, you say he's a mahader. He goes the extra mile. He's a machmer. Rashi doesn't say medaktek b'mitzvahs. He's not a machmer. Yitzchak gives Meiser from everything, including salt, including straw. He's a medaktek b'mitzvahs. He's a medaktek b'mitzvahs. How do you give Meiser? Do you give Meiser 10% of the salt and the straw itself? Or do you give Meiser of the salt and the straw the way it may contribute significantly to the food or the brick? He's medaktek b'mitzvahs. Now you can't ask a question of Amiratzis. It's not Amiratzis. Good kasha. And you can't say, why weren't you watching your father? He was watching his father. But this is not something you can easily discern or observe exactly what was the 10% of the Melech and the Tevin. You can add even more. By Avram it says, Vayiten Meiser mikoil asher loy. In other words, the objective here is, I should look at all of my nechasim, all of my property, all of my resources, anything I own, and I'm giving Meiser from everything. Mikoil asher loy. If that's the case, I may, in this perspective, Eisav says, look at all of my wealth as one entity, and I'm giving Meiser mikoil asher loy. If so, when I'm looking at the salt and the straw, I'm not only going to look at them as individual items, I'm going to look at them vis-a-vis all of my nechasim. When I look at them vis-a-vis everything else, now they're far more significant than they are. Eisav asks, and he indeed is trying to impress Eisav he's trying to impress Yitzchak with something very significant. The Shiur now officially crosses borders from the world of Nigla to the world of Nister. Yes. You see how good he was? He's asking, what's the Ramos of Eisav? Sagut Kasha. That's what a good Ramai does. You're making a very good point now. Gewaldig. That's it. What do you think Ramos says? You come in and you say, Ich bin aligner. You come and you ask, Alom de Shekasha. Me ken sich mefalpel sein of them. But what's your kavanah? The freg's good. I was once teaching Masechta Psachim in Yeshiva, so we learned the first Taisvus. Taisvus says, the Mishnah Oila Basa Beit Kines HaChametz Loyer Haneh. You have to do b'dikas chametz. Frek Tosfos, why? The Gemara says, Psachim dav dalid, b'doiraisa, b'bittel, b'al masagi. You don't have to eliminate the chametz, you could just be mevatel chametz. You get up and you declare the chametz is hefker, completely hefker, like Shittas HaTosfos. Rashi holds a little different. It's hefker, that's it. So Tosfos answers, why do you have to be boidik chametz? Why did the Chazal care? Just make it hefker. Let all the pizza and the mashke and the bagels and the cake stay, Pesach. Just make it hefker, it's good. And for Tosfos, Shema Yavai L'Yachloi. You may come to eat it if it's in your house. So the Chazal said, get rid of it. Search for the chametz and eliminate it. Bittel is not enough, beer is enough. So one of this Talmudim is sitting there. He says, I don't understand this Tyson. Doesn't make sense. I said, why? He said, who in their right mind is going to come to eat chametz? Who's going to eat chametz on Pesach? I'm like, you see the Chazal were successful. The fact that you don't understand Tosfos shows that they were successful. Because if chametz would have required only bittel, so basically 11:59 a.m. every Erev Pesach, every Jew would get up and in 10 seconds they would be ready for Pesach. They would declare all the chametz. But now, meraiptum, mezuchtum, and nishtatum, aloiftarum, and everyone is busy a month, a week, whatever it is, unless you're going to a hotel but that Tosfos didn't know about yet, to do it. So the whole idea of chametz became so questionable. Who's going to eat chametz? That's exactly the point. So sometimes from the question, you could see the success of the story. You're asking a good question. So Eisav could have fooled you too. Kitzayid b'fif. That's the word. If he would have been shown as an Amoritz, then there's no Ramos. The point is he's asking well. And it seems like, wow. You know, a bacha who asks such a question, it demonstrates sensitivity, it demonstrates diktuk, b'mitzvahs. That's like Rashi says, Kesavar Eisav, Kesavar Ravi shel medaktik b'mitzvahs. Mamish those words, not machmir, not mahader, medaktik b'mitzvahs. Which now brings us to step 2. This Medrash in Rashi, where Eisav asks Ketzad Masanas HaMelech v'Sateva, seems like, okay, we just explained, it was a nice question, a lamdish question. But like in every detail in Rashi and every detail in Torah, there are layers and layers of significance and depth. So let's now go to step 2 and see this Rashi and this Maimeh Chazal from a deeper, more spiritual perspective, which really illuminates a general sugya in the whole Parshas Toldot. The real big question, of course, for anybody who reads this whole story is, was Yitzchak so gullible? You all know your children. Can your child really lead you down a deceptive road for 60 years? I mean, you know your own sons and daughters. If your son comes up to you and says, Tata, have a shaila, how do you give Ma'aseh for Melech and Tevin? A beautiful lamdisha question. But Yitzchak didn't know his child, he didn't know Eisav. Not only does he get fooled, apparently, he loves him. Yitzchak loves Eisav, and he wants to bless him. He doesn't want to bless Yaakov. He wants to bless Eisav. What is going on here? If Yitzchak was even an ordinary person, it's very difficult to understand. Usually parents, if they're more or less healthy, balanced, normal, rational people, you know your children. You know them a little better, you know them a lot. I shouldn't say about all parents. Some parents are really clueless about their children, that's true. But because you have to care to know your child. You have to care, you have to be open to it. You have to be sensitive, you have to be attentive. If you're not attentive, you'll never know your child. You're busy projecting yourself rather than who your child is. We spoke last week with the Beis HaLevi, Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, explains the difference between Eliezer's words and Avram's words. V'lakachta isha livni, v'lakachta isha livni liyitzchak. Do I care about a shidduch for my son, or do I care for a shidduch for Yitzchak? But a person like Yitzchak Avinu was certainly attentive. He couldn't understand Yitzchak and Rivka. Why didn't she communicate with him? Why didn't they have a conversation over dinner? It's not like they didn't have a relationship. It's the only couple that it says after the marriage, Vaye'aveh, in Chayisara. Vayikach Rivka vatila Ishta Vaye'aveh, after the wedding. Now, to love your kala before the wedding, that everybody does. The chiddush is to love them after the wedding. They once asked a woman, how was your marriage? So she said, before I was married, married, I was incomplete. Now I'm married and I'm finished. But by Yitzchak it says, after. Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch in his commentary makes a big shturim. He contrasts secular marriages to Jewish marriages on this pasuk Vayehavem in Parshas Chayesara. Why couldn't Rivka and Yitzchak? They had a good relationship. It says in Parshas Metzachik is Rivka Ishta. They knew how to laugh together. However, you explain the word Metzachik, but it's a very interesting term. It doesn't say by others. Rivka couldn't speak to him. So this is a very big issue in Parshas Toldot. We're going to explore one perspective, the way it's discussed by Chachmei HaNister in Kabbalah and by Chachmei HaChassidus. It really brings us to another question. And we'll do this b'kitzer. Everybody knows the famous Rashi in the beginning of Toldot. It says, "Vayisroitzitzu abanim b'kirba." Rivka becomes pregnant, and the children are agitated in her. Vayisroitzitzu, they quarrel. So what does Rashi say? Everybody knows that Rivka would walk, when she would walk by a shul, whatever a shul meant, a yeshiva, a beis medrash, Yaakov would kick, gravitating to go out. Whenever she passed a beis avodah zarah, a pagan ashram, Eisav kicked and gravitated to avodah zarah. That means that Eisav was gravitating to avodah zarah from where? From when? From the stage when he was in the womb of his mother. I ask you, Rabbi, say a simple question. Who makes the decisions for you when you're in the womb of the mother? Anybody remembers? You think it's choice? You think it's choice? It's not choice. Who does it? Huh? God. Hashem. Or put it in simple terms, your nature, your genes, your genetic makeup, which God made for you. Your soul, your body. However you want to define it exactly. So why are we blaming Eisav? We say Eisav Harasha. In the womb of his mother, he had no chance already. This is not bchira. This is not choice. He didn't choose to gravitate to avodah zarah. This was his makeup, his essential composition in the womb of his mother. It seems inappropriate. It seems so insensitive. It seems almost cruel to call him Harasha. In the womb of his mother, you're telling me that he's gravitating to the. So as we grow up and we learn this, we take it for granted. Eisav is a Rasha, Yaakov is a tzaddik. 1 second, stop. This is a complete setup. He's put into this position. He's the bad guy. Really, you're the bad guy. You make him a bad guy. You did it. He didn't do it. So chayda, very strange. Mele, you're telling me at the age of 20 he decided shine. At the age of 13, shine. Vayigdalu anarim. This is in the womb of his mother. The most innocent space of the world. The Gemara says in Nida Daf Lamed, Tinag b'me'imay malam denoisei kol ha'Torah kula. It's the best time of life. You learn the whole Torah. And in that time, Eisav was chosen to go to gravitate avodah zarah. What's pshat? What's pshat? But here essentially lay the truth about Eisav. The beauty of Eisav and the tragedy of Eisav. And we're going to learn now a few sources inside, and we will see how they all reflect a very similar idea. Let's start with a shtickle in Tanya Perik Chav Zayin. V'zeh shamar hakasuv aseli matamim kasher ahavti. Yitzchak Avinu summons Eisav and he says, make me matamim. What's matamim? Matamim means delicacies like I love. Matamim loshen rabim. Yitzchak doesn't say, I want one dish. I want matamim, delicacies. Shnei minei nachas ruach. There's 2 types of pleasure. It says in Tikunei Zohar, says the Tanya, Aseli matamim is not just Yitzchak speaking to his son Eisav. It's a metaphor also for the Shechina speaking to her children. Let's take a physical delicacy. Says the Tanya. Probably a culinary expert, a chef, would be able to explain this better than I, but let's see what he says. There are 2 types of wonderful, delicious delicacies. One is you take sweet, delicious gzisse essen, and you make a dish. You make me a wonderful cheesecake, you make me a wonderful babka, you make me a wonderful kokosh cake. It's sweet, you use sweet For those who have a sweet tooth, it's orev, it's masuk, and everyone enjoys it. They say a geschmack. V'hasheni, but there's another type of dish. Those who know how to cook know they make a sweet dish midvarim charifim chamutzim. They take tarty foods, sharp, inedible foods, sour, chaimetz. They're not edible. They're sharp, they're too spicy. But the chef knows how to use them as a right spice and fix them up. They put in the right amount, the right dosage, and the right chemistry, and the right dish. You go, wow, what a dish. On their own, they're not good. They're not sweet foods. You take black pepper, you take garlic, you take salt, you take onions. You're not going to eat them as a meal. They're not sweet, and you don't put them in a cheesecake either. But everybody knows a good chef knows how to take pepper, knows how to take garlic, knows how to take salt, melach. And with the right amount, if you put too much, you destroy it completely. The right amount, it has a special, unique flavor, a special taste, a special tainug, because you converted something tardy and bitter into something that lahashivas hanefesh, that brings the soul pleasure. Says Yitzchak, Aseli mat'amim, shnei minei nachas ruach l'mayla. The Rebbeinu Shalom has two different nachas ruach. One is from sweet dishes, and one is from bitter dishes. V'zeu shemer hakos kol poyal Hashem l'manei v'gam rasha l'yom ra. Everything Hashem does is for Him. And even a Rasha, for the day of evil. So the literal interpretation is that even a Rasha, one day there will be the day that his rishus will end. L'yom ra, he will come to an end. He teaches, Pirish yashuv mirisha v'yasa harasha lo yoim v'or l'mayla kadiskafi sitrachre v'istali hara de kutshabricha de l'yela. There are two types of people in this world, is his message. Two types of souls, two types of journeys. The source of it is a Rambam. In Shmoyna Prakim, the Rambam wrote an introduction to Pirkei Avos called 8 chapters. Shmoyna Prakim LaRambam. In Perek Vav, the Rambam says there are two souls. HaChosid HaMa'ula and HaKoivashas Yitzray. There's a soul that we would call in English a goody-goody. Somebody who's born with a natural disposition, gravitating towards the positive, the healthy, the productive. This is a person for whom life, relatively speaking, is a more tranquil journey in a serene world. But then there's another person, somebody who's a koivishis yitzra. Everybody knows it with themselves or with their own children. You have that child already from the age of 2, already from when he was born or she was born. They knew how to sleep through the night. They did everything in the right time. They ate when you had to eat, walk when you have to walk, talk when you have to talk, sleep when you have to sleep. They grow up. They go through what's called a system. They go through the school. I'm a chaya. You never hear a complaint. You never hear a problem. Every report card is Aleph plus A. PTA, the teacher just say, I'm a chaya. Graduates high school. You ship him off to Eretz Yisrael. Alt's beautiful machas comes back. Goes here. A few years later, a shidduch. Wonderful, I'm a chaya. And then you have another child. And already from age 2 you see Sinish Pashat. At the age of 11 this kid has been in 9 yeshivas. He's been around the block. He's 9 going on 83. And usually they're very smart, sometimes much smarter than others, sensitive, deep. Very, very deep people. But what? The system doesn't contain them. The boxes that we create often don't work for them. There's tremendous creativity, there's tremendous individualism, there's tremendous potency and power. And the Rambam says it's two different types of souls with different journeys. What is the purpose of this person? The worst mistake you could make is dismiss this child as less significant, as less valuable, or as nebach, your challenge, or your misery, or your source of agony, your source of tragedy. Chas v'shalom. Aseli mat'amim. There are two journeys of two souls. One soul's journey is that the Rambam says, Chosid HaMa'ula, he or she is the person who is good and grows in goodness and holiness and beauty. But there's another person. And this person is destined to confront darkness. And to subdue it. And to sublimate it. And to deal with it. And to find sparks in places that other people are incapable of going. This is a person who has to deal with attention and with creative, vacillating forces and fluctuations in their life that other people may not understand. But this person was given the power of Akoivish Yitzra. They need to deal sometimes with a strong Yetzirah, with deep struggles, confront it, subdue it, sometimes transform it, sometimes not transform it, and sometimes their whole life they confront certain things and they never make perfect peace with it. Says Hashem, Aseli Matamim, there are two types of delicacies. One is you give me sweet food, beautiful, but there's another delicacy. You give me bitter food. V'gam rasha l'yom ra. How can bitter, tardy food, how can salt become a wonderful sweet food? Not on its own. On its own it's salty. But if you use the salt as an ingredient to spice up a salad, the salad is enhanced significantly by the salt. What does this mean spiritually and psychologically? When you face a struggle, you could look at the struggle in two ways. You could worship the struggle and see it as something self-contained, independent. In other words, I have this struggle and that's basically what it is. So therefore, one of two things. Either I'm destined to be miserable or I'm destined to succumb to the struggle and follow it. Or you could look at it in a much deeper way. You could see the struggle as a shlichus, as a spiritual opportunity, which allows you to serve God and to embrace your soul and your depth in a unique way. Here is where you take the salt and you make it part of your avodas Hashem. Now the very bitterness, the very evil, the very darkness becomes a catalyst, a springboard. It becomes a source of tremendous greatness, of tremendous depth, of tremendous morality, of tremendous majesty. Why? Because you took the very salt and you look at it and you say, this is my destiny, to take this very challenge. This is the way God wants me to serve Him, to work with it, to confront it, to elevate it, to transform it, to sublimate it, to fight with it. And suddenly the Bereshis becomes liyoim ra. It becomes, the ra becomes yoim and ur. It's an invitation for depth. It's an invitation for growth. It's an invitation for unprecedented heights. It's not an invitation for misery. It's not don't succumb to it. That's a superficial perspective. It's an invitation that this itself becomes a tremendous source of avodas Hashem. Aseli matamim. There's two. This is Yaakov and Eisav. In Klal Yisrael, this is Yaakov and Eisav. Eisav in the womb gravitates to avodah zarah. That doesn't make him a rasha. We often make a terrible mistake when we assume that somebody who struggles with evil is evil. Chalila v'chas. It's a great educational, pedagogical, and religious mistake. The fact that you struggle with evil doesn't make you evil. In fact, that may be your ultimate spiritual greatness. Because that struggle was not your negative choice, that struggle was God's choice. The fact that Eisav in the womb struggles and gravitates to avodah zarah doesn't make him a rasha. In fact, that's his path to tzidkus. That's his only path to tzidkus. He cannot choose not to gravitate to avodah zarah. The path that God designated for him to reach Hashem is through gravitating to avodah zarah and confronting it. Dealing with, that's his path to Hashem. In fact, if you're going to tell him, you have another path, that's not true. All you're doing is depriving him from his relationship with God. Because that relationship was not determined by him. That relationship was determined by Hashem. That's what the Rambam says in Shmoyna Prakim Perek Vav. We always have to make a distinction between succumbing to a struggle and the struggle itself. The struggle itself is never evil and never negative. In fact, it may be his or her holiest moment. The Moirei Nayim, the Heilige Reb Nachum Chernobyl writes in Moirei Nayim at the end of the book in Masechta Yuma. It's a fascinating piece. I'm going to say one word. The Gemara says in Yuma Daf Lamed Hey, Habol Tahir Messiah Habol Tomei Poischin Loi. Somebody who comes to be cleansed and to cleanse others, they help him from heaven. Somebody who comes to contaminate himself, Poischin Loi. They open the doors for him. They let you do it. So the Moirei Nayim gets into a few questions over there in the Gemara, And he explains the Gemara as follows. Somebody who comes to be cleansed, they help him. Somebody who comes to be contaminated, poischinloi. Poischinloi means he must know this is his Pesach for Avodas Hashem. This is his door. Haboli tameh. When you're struggling with a particular tumah, poischinloi. This is your door to touch God. By dealing with this issue, by confronting this skeleton, by subduing this demon, by fighting this addiction, by transcending this ghost. Poischinloi, this is your Pesach for Kedusha. Don't look in the mirror and say, wow, I'm such a loser. I'm so hopeless. I'm so horrible. Poischinloi, this is your door to spirituality. You know why? Because if this is what you must deal with, this is the path through which you will find your deepest resources, your deepest koiches, your deepest faculties, your deepest soul. This is what Hashem wanted for you. Asei li mat'amim. There's no one delicacy that Judaism offers for God. There's a very different type of matamim. There's cheesecake and there's spicy foods. Which is better? Depends on your taste buds. Depends on who you are. Which is sweeter? There's Yaakov and there's Eisav. So the challenge of Eisav was not in the womb. The womb was his holiness. That was his shlichus. The tragedy of Eisav was he didn't realize that his struggle with Avodah Zarah was an invitation to connect to Hashem in a deeper way. He understood, if I struggle with this, this is who I am. This is the mistake that so many of us make. If I struggle with something, it means there's nothing but that. This issue is who I am. I define myself by my struggle and I surrender to it. Rather than, don't define yourself by the struggle. You define the struggle. Don't let the struggle define you. I'll say it again. Instead of letting the struggle define you, you define it. You say, this is my opportunity to serve God in the way He wants. I should serve Him. I should serve Him. You have to serve Him differently. Yitzchak Avinu understands Eisav. He appreciates Eisav. He knows that Eisav is not the child who he is supposed to become. But he never forgets Esav's potential. And because he never forgets Esav's potential, he has a special sensitivity to him. And he wants to bless him, hoping that through the brachas, he will be able to help Eisav see himself from God's perspective. The challenge of Eisav is he never sees himself from Hashem's perspective. He sees himself as an evil person. Look at yourself from Hashem's perspective, and then you'll see that all your struggles are God's invitation for you to become as holy as ever. But they're an invitation. Eisav doesn't see that. So now, let's see a fascinating interpretation that has been attributed to the Vilna Gaon. Take a look. Says a pasuk in Malachi. This is the Haftarah of Toldot. And it's fascinating that we read this as the Haftarah of Toldot. The prophet Malachi says in Perek Aleph, pasuk Beis and Gimel, Ahafti eschem amar Hashem. I love you, says Hashem. People think that the word I love you was invented by some people living in our generation. But the Navi Malachi says, Ahafti eschem amar Hashem, I love you. Va'amartem bameha aftonu. Now you're going to tell me, really, where do we see that you love us? Says Hashem, Eisav leYaakov num Hashem. Eisav is a brother to Yaakov. V'oyeves Yaakov, I love Yaakov. Es Eisav sonesi, and I despise, I hate Eisav. V'osim es harav shmama, v'es nachalosoi l'sanois midbar. I place his mountains will become desolate. So here there's an interpretation attributed to the Vilna Gaon. And let me tell you the source. It's been quoted frequently. What's the source for this interpretation of the Vilna Gaon? A letter that was written by the first chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Avram Yitzchak HaKoyen Cook, printed in Igros Hariyah, Igeres Kuf Yud Beis, Ugdoilim Divrei Hagraza. Great are the words of the Vilna Gaon. Ve'es Eisav sonesi, es hatofel Eisav. Avali korei shehu roishoi, bahadi avon da al megoniz. Val kein roisi ponecha kirois pnei elikim omar ish ha'emes Yaakov ishtam. The Vilna Gaon says, look at the words of Malachi. It doesn't say, V'oyev Yaakov ve'esav sonesi. V'oyev es Yaakov. Ve'es Eisav Sanesi. What's the S? The S throughout the whole Torah, whenever it says S is Tafel. For example, the Gemara says, V'rachatz es kol psore b'mayim. You go to the mikveh, you have to wash your whole flesh in the water. It could have said, V'rachatz kol psore b'mayim. What's S? S adds Es ha-tafel l'psarai. Even that which is secondary to your flesh. Your hair also has to go into the water. Even one strand of hair can't be out of the water. That's S. Kabeit Es avicha, who's Es avicha? It adds even that person who's secondary to your father, your older brother. Es imecha, your sister. Bereshis bara l'kim Es ha-shamayim, ve'es ha'aretz. The hosts of the heaven, the hosts of the earth, the various planets. Ve'es Eisav sanesi, I don't hate Eisav. You know what I hate? Es Eisav. The tafel to Eisav. That which attached itself to Eisav. That which Eisav made of himself. Eisav in his head. Eisav in his source. Eisav in his essence. He is concealed with the fathers of the world. Meaning, of course, what is he referring to? You remember? Where is Eisav's head buried? With Yitzchak. With Yitzchak. Why? The head of Eisav represents the source of Eisav, the origin of Eisav, the essence of Eisav. The essence of Eisav is as holy as Yitzchak, as holy as Yaakov. In fact, he has a greatness even deeper than Yaakov. That's the head of Eisav. The way Hashem sees Eisav from the source, from the perspective, the way Eisav needed to look at himself was, I'm not a Rasha, I have the potential to be a great tzaddik through a different path. Through Koivish Yitzra, yes, I have to confront lots of stuff, and I may have to confront them my whole life. But that doesn't make me a Rasha. That makes me a different type of tzaddik. That's the head of Eisav. Ve'es Eisav sanesi. What I hate about Eisav was the tafel of Eisav, that which attached himself to Eisav. What Eisav made of his struggles, instead of seeing his struggles as an opportunity for unprecedented spiritual growth, he saw his struggles as a license to become a promiscuous, superficial person whose behavior was indeed negative. So Yaakov, Isha, Emes, sees Eisav, and what does he say? I see your face, and it looks like the face of God. Really? What is this? Flattery? Chanifa? You look at Eisav HaRasha, your face looks like God? Parshas Vayishlach, Kirois Pnei Elokim. He says, yeah. Yaakov, Isha, Emes says, when I look at your face, your Pnei, your Pnimius, now I have to say, I looked, where does the Vilna Gaon say this? Rav Kook quotes him. And it's been quoted in many Svarim. So today it's easy to search. So Leis Ata, I couldn't find anywhere in all of the Svarim of the Vilna Gaon that he says this. However, I found it, or something very similar, in a source far earlier than the Vilna Gaon. A century, more than a century before the Vilna Gaon. Rabbeinu Menachem Azaria Afanu of Italy, known as the Ramemi Panu, one of the G'dolei HaMekabalim, who wrote many Svarim on Kabbalah, and he has a famous sefer called Maimer HaNefesh. And he says in Chelik Vav, listen to his words, Ki Adirab, Haya Mechemlas HaMakam Al-Brua, from the compassion of God on his creatures. Shafilu Amardim Va'apoishim Boi Miyet HaKosav B'Sinasan. Even those who rebel against him, the Torah minimizes their hatred. Diksiv Ve'es Eisav Sanesi. Es Hanitbol Elov Min Habilti Toir. Hu Asonoi L'Makam. Ve'esav Asid L'Toir. Incredible words. The Es Eisav, that which became attached to Eisav, the Tafel Es Hanitbala Eisav, that which became an adhesion to Eisav, like a dibuk that connected himself to Eisav. That's what I despise. Eisav himself, we all know that the Chazer, Eisav is compared to the Chazer, is called Chazer. Shetachzer li Yisrael. Eisav himself is going to become Tahir. Eisav in his Shirish is a beautiful, beautiful child. Complicated child. Uninhibited child. Complex child. Struggling child. Difficult child. Challenging child. But a great child. A great soul. Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner in Ruach Chaim on Pirkei Avos. Inyan Arosh Yaakov b'Mayrim Yaakov Kamayim Chazal. What's pshat that the head of Yaakov is buried in the Mayra? Hakavon al derech hamalitza ki achuzu b'kedusha b'roish. In his head, he's connected to holiness, says Reb Chaim Volozhin. This is what Chazal say in Sukkah Dafnan Beis, that la'asid lavei the koyach harad Yitzhar will be slaughtered. What does this mean? HaKavanah, derech hamalit to the parable is, ki roishe levad yishar b'kedusha v'yi nifrich lo yishtal shalamatu b'chinas ra. His head, his origin will remain in holiness, and he won't evolve and fall down in negativity. Ki aidei hatshuva yizbatel ma she'asa b'chetei lamata v'lo yishar l'mayla aleim hakitruk. Eisav himself can return. Now, come back with me to the Rashi. Eisav comes to his father and he says, Keitzad ma'asrin es hamelech ve'es haTevin. Let's remember what the Tanya said about salt and spices. Salt on its own is bitter. When you contribute it, you put it into a food, gewaldig, it's not bitter anymore. It's a wonderful thing to have salt. It gives the flavor to the entire food. We explained also about straw, that it contributes so much to making the brick. So here you have two things on their own, they're not very valuable. When you look, however, how they enhance other things, they become very valuable. Comes Eisav and he says, Abba, my father. Why do we have to put in the word Abba? Rashi says Eisav is talking to Yitzchak, we know. The first Rashi says, Yodei Tzayid, Lotzu the Loramas, he says, hey, what's Abba, father? We know he's talking to his father. That's the whole story here. Rashi says, Abba. There's a very deep remez here, because here we can explain this question on two levels. How Eisav is in his source, and how Eisav is in his ultimate manifestation in this world. In other words, we're going to study now Eisav on two levels. As great psychoanalysts, we're going to look at Eisav from his pristine potential, that Eisav talking, and we're going to listen to Eisav the way he actually manifests himself in this world, and it's not the same Eisav. Reisha the Eisav, the head of Eisav, the real Eisav, the authentic Eisav, the naked, pure Eisav, is be'itve de Yitzchak. It says in Targum Yonis of New Zealand Vayechi, is in the bosom of Yitzchak. And it's a great pella, because the halach in Shulchan Aruch is you're not allowed to bury a Russian near a tzaddik. You're not allowed to. In Melachim there's a story. Elisha Hanavi was buried where? His body was buried with a Rosh Merusha, with a Navi Sheker. And the Pasuk says in Melachim there was a miracle of Tchias HaMeiseh. That corpse got up and got buried somewhere else, all so that a Rosh shouldn't be buried near a tzaddik. There's a whole sugya in Gemara Sanhedrin Daf Mem Zayin on this. And it's halach in Shulchan Aruch. Here, Ad HaYoym Hazeh, Yitzchak is buried near Eisav. It's a past. For Elisha, there was Tchias HaMesim. For Yitzchak, there won't be Tchias HaMesim, that he shouldn't be buried near that. The pshat, of course, is the head of Eisav is not a Rosh. The head of Eisav belongs to Yitzchak. That's what we're learning here. The S Eisav Sanesi. The S of Eisav I despise. Now you'll ask, it says V'oyev Es Yaakov. That's the difference. By Yaakov, I love not only Yaakov, but even the S of Yaakov. Because Yaakov made sure that his S is connected to his Shirish. By Eisav, there's a tragic split. So now, what do they say the definition of chutzpah is? You come to your therapist because you have a split personality and you want a group discount. Okay. So we're going to give Eisav now a good split personality. And when Eisav says, Abba ha'eich ma'asnas ha'melech v'es yeah? So Freud said, sometimes a cigar is only a cigar. But we know the truth. It's almost never the case. So when Eisav says, Abba eich ma'asnas ha'melech v'es we're going to hear two Eisav speak. We're going to hear one Eisav speak and we're going to hear another Eisav speak. First, let's listen to the true, ultimate Eisav. The Eisav who the Ramemi Panu says is Asid Litoyer. Here he puts in the word Abba. Abba, my father. Keitzad ma'asrinas hamelech v'es. Usually, what is Meiser? Meiser is the part that we make holy. The 10% that goes to the Kohen, to the Levi, to the Yerushalayim. There's some level of Kedusha there, different levels, but some level of Kedusha. Salt doesn't have that. Straw doesn't have it. These are more garbage foods. Straw is animal fodder. Melech doesn't grow from the ground. There's no meiser. Melech is bitter. Tevin is Michael Behema. Who does this remind us? This is what they told Eisav in yeshiva. One somebody told him, you're salt, you're bitter. Nobody can eat you, nobody can taste you, get out. And somebody else said, the Bista Behema. You remember? Bista Behema. That's what you are. How many people hear that? B'sta behema, b'sta sheret, b'sta chayera. You know, they say that there was somebody who needed to rent a house. So he found a house in Borough Park on 14th Avenue. And there was a condition that the landlord said he doesn't want to have children, no family with children, because it's an older couple, they go to sleep 8 o'clock, and they don't want, noise at night. So Ingaman said, fine. He signed a lease, he comes in. He was living upstairs, and the landlords were living downstairs. The first night, the guy goes to sleep, it's 8 o'clock at night, he goes to bed, his wife goes to bed, and suddenly, Metan Stuff and Cup, they're dancing, there's 7 hakafas going on. Till 3 in the morning, they're jumping and jumping, couches are moving, so he runs up finally, he runs up and he sees 14 children. K'nayin Hara, the family has, Ken Yerbu, 14 children. He looks at the landlord and he says, I don't understand. Why did you deceive me? We made a deal, no children, no kinder. He says, das is kinder, das is chayes. He says, this is not children, this is animals. They're not children, right? So, what did they tell Eisav? You're a behema. You have to eat Michael behema. You have to eat food of animals. Tevin. Comes Eisav and he says, Father, nobody understands me, but you tell me. Keitzad ma'asrinas hamelech v'satevin. How do you find the holiness in salt, and how do you find the holiness in straw? Es hamelach ve'es hatevin. Say it good. How do I find the holiness? You know me in my truth. You know who I really am. This is Eisav's subconscious speaking, or Eisav's superconscious speaking. Abba, he says, my father. You're my father. I come from you. You're one of the others. Teach me how to make the salt and the straw holy. There's a way to make them holy. You know how you make them holy? You make them holy by realizing that the Michael Behema, that the animal within me doesn't make me an evil person. The animal within me is part of my spiritual shlichus, part of my sacred mission. To use my animal instincts, my animal struggles, my beastly consciousness as a tool, as a path of my avodas Hashem, whatever that means in my life. Sometimes it means to fight, sometimes it means to subdue, sometimes it means to educate, sometimes it means to refine, sometimes it means to sublimate, sometimes it means simply to say no. In each person's life there are different things, just like with your animal. What do you do with your puppy when anybody has a puppy here? What do you do with your puppy? Sometimes you got to zap it. Sometimes you got to take it for a walk. Sometimes you got to give it a little caress. Sometimes it needs a good discipline. That's what it is. We all have our little puppy, and some of us have a German Shepherd. Okay. The bark is bigger than the bite. Abba, and the truth is, as we explained in Nigla, it's just the same in Nister. What's the question? Is salt valuable the way it is on its own, or the way you look how it contributes to something else? That's the story of Eisav. If you look on Eisav on his own, you look at his struggles, you can dismiss him as a Rasha. But if you understand that the salt, the spices, the straw, really has a tremendous power to give flavor and enhance and bring so much positivity to the world, you look at it differently. You could look at the very evil and the very struggle as an opportunity for tremendous growth, for tremendous goodness, if you know how to channel it, how to harness it, how to deal with it. Now let's look at the question from Eisav here below. Eisav below. What does Eisav say? Eisav says, Eisav wants to make salt and straw holy on their own. Eisav wants to give meiser from the straw of life, from the salt of life. In other words, he wants to attribute spiritual worth to animal fodder. Instead of exploiting the material to serve the spiritual, he wishes to invest the material with independent significance and value of its own. And this is the tragedy of Eisav. Instead of realizing that the point of the Melech and the Tevin is to serve the spiritual, to become an opportunity, a catalyst to avodas Hashem, he wants to give meiser from Melech and Tevin. He sanctifies the struggle itself. Because I struggle with this, this is my path. And here, from a potential tzaddik, he falls down. He separates his head, his great calling, his great promise from the way he actually lives his life. Which in our life would mean, I struggle with something, and instead of realizing that this is poischenloi, this is my path for growth, I give up. I say, this is who I am, and this is my lifestyle, and I surrender to the craving, to the addiction, to the disposition, to the instinct. It doesn't mean it's not a difficult choice. It's a very difficult choice. But Eisav gives Kedusha itself to the Melech and the Tevin. You don't give Maisa for Melech and Tevin. This is Eisav below speaking. So we have this conversation on two different levels, and both are true simultaneously. There's the Eisav above, and there's the Eisav below. There's the beautiful Eisav, the majestic Eisav, and there's the tragic Eisav. There's Eisav's head, and there's Eisav's body. Now, let's conclude and see full circle when we examine two psukim in Tanakh. Says the pasuk, the third to the last source. Says the pasuk in Evadia Perik Aleph pasuk Yitches. V'haya beis Yaakov eish, ubeis Yosef lahava, ubeis Eisav lakash. The house of Yaakov will be fire. The house of Yosef will be lahava, will be a flame. The house of Eisav will become kash, straw. Kash and Tevin, people usually interchange as the same thing, straw. So Eisav is the straw. Eisav wants to give meiser to Tevin, and he becomes lakash. But wait, it's not so simple. Comes Tosfos in Baba Metzia Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, the first Tosfos in Perek HaMakabel. Zok Tosfos beTevin u bekash. Listen to Tosfos. The part that gets cut, the shaft that gets cut with the stalk of wheat is called Tevin. Stubble. You see, Ishtubla is stubble. The part that remains on the ground, it doesn't get harvested with the grain itself, with the stalk, is called Kash. Kediksiv, Gam Tevin, Gam Mispoy, Rav Imonu. Rivka tells Eliezer, come to our house. We have Tevin, straw, and we have plenty of food for your camels. Tevin is that which gets harvested and you're going to feed to your animals. That which remains on the ground, you don't give to the animal to eat. It's too rough even for animals. Tevin is animal fodder. Kash is not animal fodder. Uksiv nami, it says, L'koishesh kash l'tevin. Shoyim malaktim besadas hakash. Had nishir sham tachas ha-tevin, ki ha-tevin kvar heichilichu ha-bailam ish lebeisa. The tevin you take together with the stalks of wheat, with the kernels to your home, because the kernels you're going to feed to the people, and the tevin you're going to feed to the animals. The kash is that which remains in the karka. And therefore it's not even edible, it's too rough even for animals, for most animals. And that's what the Jews had to deal with. They had to look, l'koishesh kash l'tevin. They had to look for the kash in order to use that for the bricks, because the tevin was already gone. Eisav asks, Keitzad ma'asrin es hamelach ve'es ha-tevin. The pasuk says, V'hoya beis Eisav l'kash. Here we have the great distinction. The kash is the psoilus. It's the residue of the animal fodder that can't even be used for animal food. The tevin is not the wheat itself, it's not the kernels, but it can be used for animal fodder. So both words are translated as straw. Kash is straw, tevin is straw. But tevin is the shaft that is harvested together with the grain and is therefore subsequently fed to your livestock, to your animals. Kash is the stubble, as Tosfos says, the stubble that remains in the field and is too coarse even for animal consumption. Now we'll see the diuk, the difference in the psuk. Eisav was initially entrusted with what? With Tevin. Eisav had a strong animal soul, very strong animal soul. In the womb he gravitated to pagan idolatry. He was entrusted with the straw that is symbiotically related to the grain. It gets harvested with the grain. In other words, the straw that feeds the animal that serves man. This was what we entrusted Eisav. Take your tevin and turn it into levanim. Turn it into bricks that will become a diras adam, will become a home for a human being. V'gam rasha le'yamra, take your salt, take your tevin, take your straw, and turn it into a catalyst and a springboard for a tremendous destiny in serving God in this world. But Eisav then decided to reverse the relationship, meaning to make the straw the focus, to make the straw the object of life. I want the Tevin itself to be holy. I want my behemoth itself to be the aim, the goal, the mission statement, the objective. It's not here to transform, to transcend, to subdue, to elevate. My animal, my beast itself becomes holy. I have no higher focus. I have no higher mission. What happened? His Tevin turned into Kash. His Tevin turned into Kash, which is a hollow husk, depleted of all nutritive potential. Because that's what happens. When I use my skeletons, my taivas, as an opportunity for Avodas Hashem, my taivas become an instrument for Kedusha. They have so much depth. They have so much romance. They have so much majesty. Because they're fueling my relationship with my deepest soul. But when I worship them, I actually turn them into a hollow husk, because now it serves nothing but its superficial instincts, and ultimately it becomes disappointed with itself because it's not fulfilling its purpose. Because the purpose of Eisav is also just like Yaakov, to bring light into the world, not to bring darkness into the world. And whenever you deplete something from its potential, ultimately it itself feels empty. But now take a look at the last pasuk. Yeshayahu Perek Samachei pasuk Chav Beis. The days of Mashiach, Zeivutle Yiru Ke'echad. The wolf and the lamb will shepherd together. The Aryeh Kabakar Yoichal Tevin. The lion as the ox will eat straw. V'nachash afar lachmai le'yereyu v'lo'yashchisu b'chol har kotshi Amar Hashem. In the world of Mashiach, such empty materialism will cease to be. The kash of Eisav will be completely consumed by the spiritual life. Ahoya base Eisav, lekash. The kash will be depleted. Tevin, on the other hand, will become the staple of the animal kingdom, and that's why the lion and the ox shall eat straw. Aryeh kabaka yoichal Tevin, because then will be the ultimate sublimation of Eisav, where the two brothers become one. Only the Eisav Sanesi, but the head of Eisav will become completely united with Yaakov. Have a wonderful, wonderful week.